Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at the life and death of Haman. Haman was a Persian official during the 5th century BC, and Haman is the poster child for how to lose it all because of dumb mistakes and deadly errors. If you don't know the story, I'm eager to tell it to you. It's an engaging story. I think you'll enjoy studying it with me. And it's in the Bible for our benefit. We can avoid common catastrophic failure by learning from Haman's mistakes instead of having to make those same mistakes ourselves and suffer the consequences for it. If you already know the story, I hope you'll see it with fresh perspective. So we're going to jump into it. It's found in the book of Esther. Let me just kind of catch you up on the first couple chapters because Haman doesn't come into the picture until chapter 3. So here's some highlights from the first couple chapters of the book of Esther. It tells the story of the king of Babylon. His name was Ahasuerus, or the Greeks called him Xerxes. You may have heard of him in history class. Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, had gotten rid of the queen because she showed him up when he was showing off. We could probably do a whole series on guys that do that, right? But we're not going to. Ahasuerus launched a major military campaign and he lost. When he came back, he was sad because of the campaign that he lost, but also sad because he missed the queen. So his officials suggested a year-long Find the New Queen contest, and participation in this contest was not voluntary. They rounded up young, beautiful women from around the kingdom, brought them in, and over the course of a year, King Ahasuerus picked the one he wanted. Esther is the name of the one who won. She's now the queen of this kingdom. Her uncle, Mordecai, discovered an assassination plot against the king and told Esther about it. Now, Esther went in and told the king, and an investigation proved that Mordecai was right, and so the plotters were executed. And we're ready now to jump into our story where we're going to meet Haman. So, Esther, chapter 3, verse 1, starts this way. After all this took place, so all the stuff we just talked about, and then about 5 years. So we're 5 years after the foiled assassination plot. After all this took place, King Ahasuerus honored Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and he promoted him in rank and gave him a higher position than all the other officials. Notice there were 3 verbs, and those 3 verbs indicate that this was a major ascension for Haman, right? He's honored by the king. The king promoted him, and the king gave him a higher position than all other officials. So this is a big, big deal. Verse 2. The entire royal staff of the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman because the king had commanded this to be done for him. So here we see the entire royal staff is bowing down every time Haman passes by. They bow down and they pay homage to him. This is more than just showing respect or recognition of a superior. There was more to it than that. Verse 2 continues, but Mordecai would not bow down or pay homage. And so here we have it. The uncle to the queen, although I don't think Haman knew who Mordecai was. You'll see that later in the story. The uncle to the queen wouldn't do either. He wouldn't bow down and he wouldn't pay homage. It seems that he believes it violated what God required of him as a Jew. Now, the Jews often bowed out of respect, so this seems to be something different. And we don't have all the details there, but what we do know for sure is Mordecai wouldn't do it. All right, so let's continue. In verses 3 and 4, where you see workplace drama. See, it's not just where you work. This has been around for years. Look at the drama here. Verse 3. The members of the royal staff at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why are you disobeying the king's command? And when they had warned him day after day, and he still wouldn't listen to them, they told Haman in order to see if Mordecai's actions would be tolerated, since he had told them he was a Jew. You see all the drama there? They're like, hey, why are you doing this? You know, they got to know. Right? They got to poke their nose into his dealings, his business. And then when Mordecai either didn't answer or they didn't like the answer or they weren't sure what to do with the answer, then they warn him, like, if you don't stop burning down, we're going to do something. We're going to tell on you. You're going to get in trouble, right? All that stuff, right? And then they tattled on him. It appears up to this point, Haman hadn't even noticed Mordecai's disobedience. And so they went and they told on him. They tattled like, hey, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, Haman, but there's this one guy, he's not doing what he's supposed to do, right? His name is Mordecai. He's a Jew and all this. He's not, right? They tattled on him. What drama. So, verse 5, when Haman saw that Mordecai was not bowing down or paying him homage, he was filled with rage. Well, now Haman noticed, and he was outraged in the moment. He's like, oh, true. What are you thinking? How could this guy not? Right? But it doesn't end there. Haman became fixated on this one man who wasn't bowing down. Everybody else is bowing down, but he gets fixated now on Mordecai. And as the story continues, we're going to see that Haman became obsessed with getting rid of Mordecai. That's Haman's dumb mistake. He let the one keep his focus. The one guy, right? The one keep his focus. It wasn't enough for Haman that the king honored him above everyone else and that everyone else bowed down to him. The fact that one man refused to honor him and give him the respect that he felt he deserved completely ruined his ability to enjoy the honor he'd been given by the king and the respect that he's being showed by everyone else. He let the one keep his focus. That's a dumb mistake. And it's not limited to Haman. You and I can make that same mistake, right? Let the one keep your focus, the one comment, or the one person, or the one mistake that you made, or the one bad grade, or the one set of rolled eyes, or the one whatever. It's a mistake to let the one, you fill in the blank, keep your focus. Since I don't want to embarrass anybody else, I'll tell a bad story on myself. Years ago when I was a teacher, a math and science teacher, every year I would have an evaluation from my administrator. And so he came in to do his evaluation, and he had a form with him that he had downloaded from somewhere and not updated for himself or whatever. So he does his evaluation of me that day and watching me teach, watch how the students interact, and am I prepared? How did it all go, right? And then he called me into his office, and as he's going over the evaluation with me, I scored super high marks in every single category except for, yeah, you guessed it, one, right? One. But instead of looking at it as a mature person should or whatever, instead of looking at it and going, wow, this is awesome. My boss thinks I'm a great teacher. He gave me great grades in every area except for one. I became obsessed with the one, right? And it totally captivated my attention. I couldn't even remember. I could not to this day tell you any of the positive areas where I scored high marks in. I could only tell you about the one, and here's why. The one that he marked me down for was that I didn't have a well-decorated bulletin board, a well-decorated bulletin board in my classroom. And you could kind of say, well, that's because I was a high school teacher. It seems to me, I'm not trying to say anything bad here, but it seems to me that, the elementary teachers, they have really nice bulletin boards. We high school teachers, yeah, not so much. Our version of decorating our classroom is we write today's assignment on the chalkboard somewhere, right? I didn't even have a bulletin board in my classroom. And I think that's what made me mad at first. I'm like, wait, you put down on my professional recommendation below, an unsatisfactory comment because of a bulletin board, but I don't have a bulletin board on any of my walls in my classroom. I don't think it's fair for you to mark me down for that. Now, if it had ended there, you probably wouldn't be hearing this story, but it didn't end there. I decided, well, fine, you want to be dumb like that and mark me down with a lower grade because I don't have a bulletin board and put that in my file? I'll get a bulletin board. So this is what I did. It was totally wrong, totally dumb, but what I did was this. I got some tools and I got a couple students and I said, hey, I want you to go down to the dining room, the cafeteria, which was also the church's fellowship hall, and I want you to steal the bulletin board right off the wall. Here's some tools, take it right off the wall and bring it up to my room. I'll lean it up against my wall and I'll decorate it. Well, that would have been bad enough except for this. Ladies from the church came in shortly after I had had my students steal the bulletin board for me. And they came in to decorate the fellowship hall for a church event. And when they did that, on that wall is this glaring absence of a bulletin board because you see the last time they had painted the fellowship hall, they had painted around the bulletin board. So all the room is one color. The bulletin board area is this old green that nothing else like that matches. So the fact that this was missing was hugely obvious. I mean, you couldn't not see the big rectangle on the wall. And so they went and told my boss, hey, somebody stole the bulletin board and it looks really bad down there and we're decorating for a formal event and stuff. Now, let me ask you, did that help my cause? Did my administrator pull back out the record on my thing and put now favorable comments on my professional evaluation? No. Now I had 2 negative comments on my professional evaluation because they let the one steal my focus. Now, it's not just me that makes this mistake. Other people make this mistake. You could make the same mistake. Let me just remind you what happens when we make this mistake of letting the one, whatever, keep our focus. If you do that, number one, it'll keep you from enjoying all the good things you have. I mean, Haman had money. He had influence. He had the king's approval. You'll see later on, he had a wife, he had kids, he had friends, he had all these wonderful things in his life, but he could not enjoy it. As you look at the stories in the coming weeks, you'll see that he couldn't enjoy any of that. His life became utterly despicable to himself until he could get rid of Mordecai. So you make this mistake of letting the one steal your focus and then keep your focus. It will keep you from enjoying all the good things that you have. Second, it will warp your estimation of how serious of a problem the one is. When the one has your focus somehow will turn the one into something really big. It's like your focus isn't just a focus, it's like a magnifying glass. And as you and we keep focusing on that one thing, that one guy, that one set of rolled eyes, that one person, that one colleague, that one mistake, that whatever it is, that one thing that we don't have that we wish we had, it'll warp our estimation of how big of a deal that one thing is, and it'll become bigger and bigger and bigger, and it'll eventually become as if the one is actually everybody or everything or every problem. It becomes huge. It warps our estimation of how big of a deal it is. And then thirdly, you do what I did. You're likely to make other mistakes while attempting to eradicate the one. That's what happens to us, right? As we stay focused on the one becomes unbearable to us and we have to do something about it. We have to eradicate it, right? Something drastic has to be done. And as we decide to do that and we go set about trying to eradicate the one, we start making other mistakes like I did. That's why I entitled this message, The Tyranny of the One. It's like the one takes over and starts calling all the shots as we're captivated by the one. It's safe to say you weren't planning to make that mistake. You know, this whole hey, don't let that happen to you kind of reminds me of a time, and I know I've told a few of this story, but it just so sticks with me. A few years ago, I was riding my bike early in the morning. It was dark out. I was riding with a couple doctors, and we just were kind of riding along and weren't really talking to each other. And so there in the darkness, all of a sudden, one of the doctors says to me, he says, Andy, don't get high blood pressure. And I'm like, well, I wasn't really planning to, but okay. And then he began to lay out a series of bad things that could happen. And he says, if you get high blood pressure, it'll increase your risk of, and he listed off 5 or 6 things. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's great advice, Doc. I wasn't planning to get high blood pressure, but yeah, thanks. You've definitely talked me out of it now, right? And then the silence continued, and we rode on, and it was probably about another mile down the road, and all of a sudden, there in the darkness, he said, Andy, I'm like, yeah, don't get diabetes. If you get diabetes, that'll increase your risk of, and he listed off again 4 or 5 things that would probably be a great, horrible potential in my life if I got diabetes. And my response was pretty much the same. I'm like, whoa, all right, Doc. Well, I wasn't ever planning to get diabetes, but you've definitely talked me out of it. Thank you for that great advice. We rode on in the darkness and in the silence for about another mile, and all of a sudden he said, Andy? I'm like, yeah. He said, don't get old. That'll increase your risk of everything. Thank you, Doc. That was really helpful advice. I'm not sure how I'm not going to get old. Maybe that's kind of how this feels. I'm like, hey, don't make that dumb mistake of letting the one capture your focus and then keep it. You weren't probably planning to make that mistake, and you're maybe not sure it's avoidable. I mean, we all seem to fall prey to that one. So maybe what you'd prefer, instead of me just saying, hey, don't let that happen to you, is some preventative action that you could take. A preventative step that would make it very unlikely that the one would keep your focus and hold on to it. So here's a preventative step that you and I can take. Celebrate. Celebrate. Practice gratitude and celebration. I've been trying to work on this in my own life. So my habit that I'm trying to practice is taking some time over lunch to work on a list of things that I'm truly grateful for. So I pull out my list most days at lunch and I read through it, and then I try to periodically add one. And some of these things on my list are possessions that I have, my bike or whatever. Some of them are just some things about how God has taken care of me in the past. Some of them are things that, I just notice. Like, for example, on my list are the fact that God made hills and valleys. And they're so beautiful. You can go down through the valley and then later on, you're up on top of the hill and you can see so far, and there's so many different beautiful things there. Some of the things on my list are things that God has taken me through or delivered me from, or some are things God has protected me from. The fact that my kids love me, that's on my list. There's so many different things like that. That is a preventative step, because as you and I stop and we practice gratitude and we read through or think through a list of things that we're truly grateful for, it helps us focus on the many great things that we have in our lives. And that helps prevent us from just being so caught up in the one thing that we don't have and can't seem to get. Let's jump back to Haman's story. The king, Ahasuerus, was enamored with Haman, thought extremely highly of Haman, and promoted Haman for that reason. The king's opinion of Haman should have been the only one that really mattered, because the king was the only one really with the power to affect Haman's life. No one else could touch him. Shouldn't have mattered that Mordecai couldn't, seem to bring himself to the point where he'd bow down, because Mordecai couldn't really do anything to Haman. If Mordecai didn't like Haman, so be it. He couldn't touch Haman, right? When I was first reading through this passage a few months ago, I wrote the following in my journal. It's easy for us to do the very same thing that Haman did. We get hung up on a person who's not giving us the treatment we think we deserve, and totally forget that the most powerful and impressive person in the room is fully for us. Haman should have been ecstatic that the king liked him. Who cares about another person? In the same way, you and I should be ecstatic that God knows our name, sees us, cares about us, loves us, even sings over us. Who cares about the opinion of another person? God is enamored with us. That should do it for us. The person with power, the person whose opinion is the one that should matter, is the King, God Almighty, and He loves us and is for us. That should be all that matters. Who cares about the opinion of another person? And the answer to that question is, I do. And probably often you do as well. It is so easy for us to do exactly what Haman did. Forget that the one whose opinion should matter is the only one that matters, and instead be caught up in the fact that someone else's opinion matters. This is the dumb mistake. You could phrase it this way. This is a subset of the one that we've already talked about. And it's this: letting the disposition of one person towards you affect you more than God's disposition toward you. Oh, that's a dumb mistake. Letting the disposition of one person affect you more than God's disposition toward you. You make that mistake, what happens? Well, basically the same things we said before, right? We'll miss out on enjoying our relationship with God. And if we continue to focus on the one person and their attitude towards us, or their actions towards us, their disposition towards us, it will warp our estimation of just how big of a deal that is. And then we're likely to make other mistakes while attempting to eradicate the one, right? Because we come to the point where we just can't live with that one person's attitude, or their eye rolling, or their snide remark, or their passive aggressive behavior, or whatever. And we'll do crazy dumb things to try to eradicate and fix that one. So how do we prevent that? Well, the same things that we've already talked about. Celebrate. Practice gratitude and celebration. On that list of things that you go over and you thank God for and you're grateful for, put on there the fact that God himself is for you, that Jesus intercedes for you, that Jesus is your advocate and you never have to defend yourself because he's your advocate. He's the one who defends you, that God welcomes you into your presence. Put those kinds of things on there and practice gratitude for them and celebrate them. You know, as I was thinking about this, it hit me that probably the only time that it's wise to let the one keep your focus is when the one is God. One last observation before we wrap this up today. I think we men, guys, are especially vulnerable to Haman Syndrome because we so highly value respect. What's Haman Syndrome? It's that outrage over the lack of respect that we get from the one person. Outrage over the lack of respect from a person that we believe owes it to us. That outrage because we don't get that respect that we believe we fully deserve, and maybe we do deserve it. That's not my point. That outrage, I call that Haman Syndrome. And guys, I think we are especially prone to this, especially susceptible to Haman Syndrome because we highly value respect. Ladies, maybe you do too, I don't know, but I'll just speak for us guys. Guys, what can we do about that? Well, I think one of the great restorative steps, maybe even a cure that we can take is this. When we realize we're starting to get really worked up, we're angry because we're not getting the respect that we believe we deserve, maybe the respect we think that God has commanded somebody to give to us. When we realize that we're getting all worked up over that, the first thing I think we ought to do is stop and just say this to ourselves. The problem here is I'm not getting what I want. That advice came from Andy Stanley, and I think it's spot on. See, what I am saying to myself in that moment usually is not that line from Andy Stanley. No, I'm usually saying here, the problem here is you're not respecting me like you ought to. The problem here is you're not treating me the way God wants you to treat me. The problem here is you're, right? And it helps if we stop and say, whoa. The problem here is I'm not getting what I want. And I'm getting upset because I'm not getting what I want. I'm getting angry and I'm tempted to lose control because I'm not getting what I want. And what I want in this moment is for you to, right? So the first step is to just stop long enough to say, whoa. The problem here is I'm not getting what I want. Now there's more to the story, but we're starting there. And then second, after we've said that and calmed ourselves down a little bit to realize that's what's going on. I want respect, and I'm not getting it. I want obedience, and I'm not getting it. I want, and I'm not getting it. Then the second part is to evaluate. And what do you evaluate? Well, you evaluate the situation, and you say, oh, okay, this is what I'm not getting that I want. In light of the fact that I'm not getting it, do I need to forgive or ask for forgiveness? Right? Evaluate that. Evaluate the situation. In light of the fact that I'm not getting what I want, do I need to forgive the person for not giving me what I believe I'm owed? Or do I need to ask God for forgiveness for what I'm doing here in this moment? You know, maybe that person really has sinned against you and they're not giving you what God clearly told them to give you. If that's the case, then you and I when that happens, we have to forgive. And then maybe confront the person too. But we can't confront until we forgive. So we evaluate. All right, did the person withhold something from me that God says they should give me? Did they sin against me? Maybe they did. If so, we forgive, and then maybe we confront. But just as often, I'm guessing the answer is no, they didn't actually sin against us. Just, I didn't get what I wanted, and I'm angry because I wanted it. And maybe I'm just being selfish, or maybe there's something else. Maybe I'm idolizing respect, and I'm like, I can't live without it. In that case, it's not so much the other person. The problem is in me. And if the problem is in me, then I need to stop and say, God, this is what's going on in me, and I need you to forgive me and help me deal with what's going on in me, because the problem is here in me. Does that make sense? So, let's wrap this up. You're like me. You weren't planning on getting high blood pressure. You're not planning on getting diabetes. and you weren't planning on getting Haman Syndrome. There may not be much you can do about avoiding high blood pressure. There may be nothing you can do about avoiding diabetes. I'm sure there's nothing you can do about avoiding getting old, but you can do something about Haman Syndrome. And what you and I can do is we can celebrate. Celebrate the good things that are in our life and celebrate the fact that the King really, really likes you and is for you. And then when we realize we're becoming outraged, we can stop and we can say, hey, the problem here is me. It's not getting what I want. And then we can evaluate, celebrate and evaluate. If we do that, two amazing things happen. One is it'll help the one be one. What I mean by that is it helps right size the one. It helps keep it down to the one being only one and not the huge, giant, out of control, oversized issue that we're likely going to make it out to be. It'll help keep the one, and we can say, you know what, it's just one person. It's just one thing that I wish. It's just one, right? If we will celebrate and evaluate, it'll help keep the one. And then second, it'll help us enjoy God and His good gifts. Man, I'd love that myself, and I'm sure that's what you want as well.